What if one moment could change your life forever? A high-powered lawyer collapses in the courtroom, vanishes from the world, and returns transformed. He gave up luxury. He sold his Ferrari. What he found instead was something far greater. This is not just a story. It's a roadmap to purpose, a call to awaken. Welcome to The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari, only on Victory Think. Let's begin. Julian Mantle had once been one of the most successful trial lawyers in the country. He was brilliant in the courtroom, aggressive in his strategies, and relentless in his pursuit of victory. His reputation had grown rapidly over the years, built upon his unwavering dedication to winning every case he touched. He lived in a world fueled by ambition, prestige, and financial success. His lifestyle reflected his professional stature. He lived in a mansion that was the envy of many, and his days began with fine espressos and ended in boardrooms or high-profile parties. One of the most symbolic representations of his wealth was his bright red Ferrari, gleaming in his driveway, a trophy of his legal conquests. But behind the success, the designer suits, and the charismatic presence, Julian's life was silently falling apart. The intensity of his profession had taken a toll on his health. His face had aged beyond his years, his body strained under the constant stress, and his mind was weighed down by endless demands. He was trapped in a cycle of performance, where every victory only led to a higher expectation for the next. His colleagues began to notice a change. The once vibrant Julian now seemed tired, distracted, and easily agitated. He began arriving late to court, often appeared disheveled, and showed little enthusiasm for even the most high-profile cases. The sharp glint in his eyes dulled, and the once relentless energy he exuded had diminished into weary indifference. Then one day, the collapse came. It was during the trial of a particularly intense case that Julian suffered a massive heart attack. In the middle of the courtroom, surrounded by lawyers, the judge, and the jury, he fell to the floor, clutching his chest. The scene froze. Paramedics rushed in, and within minutes, he was taken away on a stretcher. The courtroom, a place of his greatest triumphs, had now witnessed his most vulnerable moment. After the incident, Julian disappeared from the public eye. Rumors spread rapidly. Some said he had retired due to his health, others whispered of a nervous breakdown. But no one knew where he went. Months passed with no contact. His law firm tried reaching out, but there was no response. It was as if Julian Mantle had vanished. Then, nearly 3 years later, he returned. But the man who came back was not the Julian they had known. His physical transformation was astounding. He looked at least 10 years younger. His skin glowed with health. His posture was upright and serene, and his eyes sparkled with calm energy. He wore simple clothes, not the tailored suits he was once known for. But the most striking change was his presence. It radiated peace. When he finally met his old colleague and friend, the difference was undeniable. Gone was the high-powered lawyer consumed by deadlines and victories. In his place stood a man who had clearly undergone a profound inner shift. His speech was measured, thoughtful, and filled with clarity. He smiled easily, laughed often, and spoke with the wisdom of someone who had discovered something far beyond material success. He began to tell his story. After his collapse, Julian had realized that his life was headed in a direction he no longer wished to pursue. The wealth, the fame, the victories, they had brought him no lasting joy. He felt empty, disconnected, and lost. So he made a decision that shocked even himself. He sold everything he owned, including his beloved Ferrari, and left in search of something deeper. His journey took him across the world, ultimately leading him to India. There, amidst the Himalayas, he encountered a mystical group of monks known as the Sages of Savana. They were rumored to possess ancient wisdom that could unlock the secrets of fulfillment and purpose. Intrigued and desperate for change, Julian sought them out. The journey to reach the sages was treacherous. He traversed rugged mountains, endured bitter cold, and faced long days of solitude. But he persisted, driven by a newfound desire to uncover the essence of life. Eventually, he found them. Nestled in a remote valley surrounded by towering peaks and untouched nature, the sages of Savana lived a life of simplicity and profound peace. They welcomed him warmly and began to share with him their timeless teachings. Their leader, Yogi Raman, took Julian under his guidance. Julian immersed himself in their way of life. He woke with the sun, meditated for hours, ate pure food, and practiced ancient exercises that harmonized body and mind. Slowly, the layers of stress and toxicity began to peel away. He started to feel alive again, more alive than he had in decades. He learned that true happiness comes not from achievement or accumulation, but from within. The sages taught him the importance of mastering the mind, nurturing the body, and guarding time as one of life's most precious assets. They showed him how to visualize his goals with clarity, to live with discipline, and to serve others with love. One of the most powerful metaphors they shared with him was that of the garden. The mind, Yogi Raman explained, is like a fertile garden. If cultivated with care, it can yield flowers of wisdom, compassion, and peace. But if neglected or filled with weeds, negative thoughts, fears, and doubts, it can become a tangled mess that stifles growth. Julian was taught to tend to his mind as a gardener would tend to his flowers, with intention, patience, and persistence. Visualization became one of Julian's daily practices. Every morning he would close his eyes and vividly picture the life he wished to live. Not just material goals, but emotional and spiritual ones. He imagined himself full of energy, radiating love, living purposefully. The sages believed that the mind cannot distinguish between what is vividly imagined and what is real. By visualizing his ideal life repeatedly, Julian began to align his actions with his vision. He also learned the power of discipline. The sages practiced a technique called the 10 Rituals of Radiant Living, each designed to strengthen different aspects of life. These rituals included early rising, reading for growth, practicing stillness, and nourishing the body with natural foods. They taught Julian that greatness is built on consistent small acts, done with care and commitment. Time was another cornerstone of their teachings. The sages valued every moment and viewed time as the most precious currency. They encouraged Julian to plan his day meticulously, to avoid distractions, and to focus on what truly mattered. Time, once wasted, could never be reclaimed. Another profound teaching was about the heart. They believed that service to others was the highest purpose of life. Julian was taught to perform acts of kindness daily, no matter how small. Whether it was a smile, a compliment, or a helping hand, every act of love expanded the spirit. Giving, they said, was the secret to lasting joy. As Julian continued his story, his friend listened with awe. This was not just a story of travel, it was a journey into the soul. Julian had not just changed his environment, he had changed his essence. And now, he had returned to share this wisdom. He spoke not with pride, but with a deep desire to help others escape the same trap he once lived in. He wanted his friend to know that life need not be a race filled with anxiety and regret. It could be a dance, filled with presence and joy. He offered his teachings humbly, in the hope that others might also awaken. The monk who once sold his Ferrari was no longer chasing success. He had found significance. And in doing so, he had returned to a world that now looked entirely different through the lens of peace. Julian's tale continued with a quiet sense of reverence. He began describing the daily practices that had slowly but powerfully transformed his life. Every morning in the Himalayan sanctuary, he woke before sunrise. The soft golden light cascading through the mountains was the first thing he welcomed into his senses. The monks believed that the morning held immense energy and clarity, an ideal time to align one's spirit with purpose. One of the rituals he adopted was known as the Heart of the Rose. It was a technique designed to strengthen concentration and discipline. Each morning, Julian would take a fresh rose and focus all his attention on its center. He observed its texture, its color, its fragrance. As thoughts tried to distract him, he gently brought his attention back to the rose. At first, it was difficult. His mind wandered restlessly. But with time, the practice sharpened his mental clarity and silenced his inner chaos. He learned that the mind, if not controlled, would control the person. The sages had mastered the art of stilling the mind. They taught that mental mastery was the key to happiness. Negative thoughts were like weeds. If not removed quickly, they would take over the garden. To combat this, Julian was taught the practice of opposition thinking. Whenever a negative or limiting thought arose, he would immediately replace it with a positive one. If a voice in his head whispered, "You're not good enough," he would immediately counter it with, "I am strong, capable, and deserving." Over time, this rewiring of thought patterns created a new internal landscape, one rooted in possibility rather than fear. He also adopted the ritual of physicality. Every day, he moved his body with purpose. Whether it was brisk walking, yoga, or simple stretching, Physical movement was seen as a sacred act. The sages believed that a healthy body created a healthy mind. Movement released energy, purified toxins, and awakened clarity. Julian, who once neglected his physical well-being for the sake of courtroom victories, now treated his body as a temple. But perhaps the most impactful ritual of all was the one centered around the purpose of life. The sages believed that every person was born with a unique calling, a dharma, as they called it. Discovering this calling and dedicating one's life to it was considered the ultimate path to fulfillment. Julian had spent decades chasing wealth, unaware that his soul yearned for meaning. In the silence of the mountains, away from deadlines and distractions, he began to rediscover who he truly was. Yogi Raman asked him to reflect on a single question every day. What legacy do you want to leave behind? Do you? At first, the question seemed abstract. But with time, Julian understood. He began to write in a journal every day, pouring his heart into words. He noted down insights, goals, and dreams. The journal became a mirror, reflecting both his progress and his truth. Through writing, he began to find clarity. He began to sketch a new vision for his life, a vision based not on success, but on significance. The monks also emphasized the importance of kaizen, a Japanese term that means continuous improvement. They believed that small daily steps led to massive results over time. They challenged Julian to do one thing every day that scared him. It could be fasting, sitting in silence for hours, or waking in the freezing cold to meditate. These small acts of courage built inner strength. They reminded him that growth always lies outside comfort. He was also taught the power of simplicity. The monks lived with very little. Their homes were humble, their meals simple, their needs minimal. Yet they radiated more joy than the wealthiest people Julian had known. He began to understand that happiness was not in more, but in less. In shedding possessions, distractions, and expectations, he felt lighter, free. There was also great emphasis on the power of kindness. Each sage began their day with an act of compassion. It could be helping an elder, feeding animals, or offering prayers for strangers. Julian learned that love was not a concept. It was a habit. The more he gave, the more fulfilled he felt. He stopped seeking happiness and started becoming the source of it. In one of his most vivid memories, Julian recalled a conversation with Yogi Raman about death. The wise monk asked, "If today were your last day, would you be proud of how you've lived?" That question haunted Julian for days. He realized that he had lived more for the applause than for purpose. He had chased the illusion of success without pausing to ask whether he was truly content. He began to prioritize what mattered. Instead of schedules packed with meetings and arguments, his days became filled with reflection, nature, learning, and stillness. He no longer chased moments. He inhabited them fully. He found joy in a sip of herbal tea, in a breath of fresh mountain air, in the pages of a sacred book. And as the seasons changed, so did he. The Julian who had once judged himself by court victories and dollar signs now measured his life by inner peace and the smiles he could inspire. He no longer needed to impress. He desired only to serve. He knew that his transformation meant nothing if he did not share it with others. That was why he had returned. As he spoke, his friend listened more deeply than ever before. Every word seemed to carry weight, as if forged in the fire of experience. Julian's life had become a testament that change was possible, that it was never too late to rewrite one's story. He began to offer practical advice. Start your day with silence, even if only for 10 minutes. Visualize the person you want to become. Move your body to awaken your energy. Read a few pages of something that uplifts you. Write down your thoughts to understand yourself. Do something uncomfortable to build courage. Help someone without expecting anything in return. Guard your time as if it were your life, because it is. Reflect often on the legacy you are creating. Julian stressed that it wasn't about perfection, but about intention. Each day was an opportunity to begin again. Even on difficult days, one could still take a small step toward the light.
The teachings of the sages of Sivana were not mysterious formulas. They were habits, simple yet sacred. They had been passed down for centuries, and now, through Julian, they reached another soul. His friend began to see his own life through a new lens.
Where once he had been consumed by schedules and demands, he now paused to reflect. He began waking a little earlier. He spent more time in nature. He started journaling. The changes were small, but something within him stirred. Julian didn't preach. he inspired. And it was in that quiet inspiration that the real transformation began. He left behind no manuals, no declarations, just a few guiding principles and the living proof of a man who had found peace. The Ferrari he once prized now existed only in memory, a symbol of a life that no longer served him. He had not lost anything. He had found everything. As Julian continued to unfold his journey, he delved deeper into the individual components that made up the philosophy he had embraced. Among the most profound lessons was the ritual of abundant knowledge. The sages believed that lifelong learning was the cornerstone of inner mastery. They devoted a portion of each day to reading and reflection. Their scrolls and scriptures were ancient, filled with timeless truths. They read not to impress others, but to elevate themselves. Julian had adopted this ritual wholeheartedly. Each morning, he would read for at least 30 minutes, immersing himself in ideas that expanded his awareness and deepened his understanding of life. He also spoke of the ritual of personal reflection. Before retiring for the night, he would sit quietly with his journal and ask himself honest questions. What did I do well today? What could I have done better? Did I live with integrity? Was I kind, focused, disciplined? Through this nightly ritual, he began to notice patterns. He became aware of his strengths, and more importantly, his blind spots. This quiet examination became a compass, guiding him back whenever he strayed. The next practice he described was the ritual of early awakening. The sages were early risers. They believed that the hours before dawn were the most sacred. The world was still, distractions were minimal, and the mind was fresh. Julian had trained himself to wake up at 5 every morning. At first, it was difficult. His body resisted, but slowly, with consistency and intention, it became second nature. He came to cherish the solitude of the early hours, a time to center himself before the noise of the world began. In the quiet of those mornings, he practiced the ritual of music. The sages used music as a tool to uplift the soul. Simple melodic chants or nature sounds were often played in the background as they meditated or moved through their morning routines. Julian carried this habit with him. Even after returning to the city, he began each day by playing calming music that stirred his spirit and reminded him of the serenity he had discovered in the mountains. Julian then turned his attention to the ritual of nourishment. Food was not merely fuel, it was medicine. The monks ate a plant-based diet filled with fresh fruits, vegetables, grains, and herbs. They believed that what one consumed affected not just the body but the clarity of the mind. Julian had once relied on fast food and coffee to push through long days. Now he savored every meal, choosing ingredients with care, eating slowly, and expressing gratitude before each bite. But among all these teachings, perhaps the most transformative for him was the ritual of the spoken word. Words, the sages said, carried power. They could uplift or destroy, heal or harm. Julian began the practice of mantras, short, powerful phrases that he repeated daily. Phrases like, I am peaceful, I am grateful, and I choose happiness. He would whisper them during meditation, write them in his journal, or say them silently in moments of stress. Over time, these affirmations reshaped the way he thought, acted, and responded to life. These rituals weren't isolated activities. They were interconnected strands of a web, a way of life designed to create balance, meaning, and vitality. Together, they formed a blueprint for mastering life. But Julian's teachings weren't merely about rituals and habits. They were about a philosophy, a way of being. One of the core principles he learned from the sages was centered around the lighthouse metaphor. They believed that every human being needed a purpose, a guiding light that would keep them steady through life's storms. Without a purpose, people drift. They react instead of respond. They survive instead of thrive. But with a clear goal, with a dream that resonates with the soul, life becomes focused and meaningful. Julian had spent years drifting, pursuing goals imposed by society, status, money, acclaim, but none of it fed his spirit. Now, with clarity, he had chosen a new purpose, to share the wisdom he had gained, to help others awaken before it was too late. The sages taught him how to discover one's purpose through a powerful method called Dharma. Dharma wasn't just about what you did, it was about who you were meant to become. To discover it, one had to turn inward, listen to the whispers of the heart, and identify the gifts that came naturally. Julian was guided through exercises to reflect on what brought him joy, what made him lose track of time, and what he would do even if no one paid him. Slowly, a picture formed. His gift was communication, and his passion was growth. He knew then that his calling was to teach, to inspire, to guide. With that purpose, his life took on a new rhythm. Each day had a reason, each action had weight, even challenges became opportunities to grow into the person he was meant to be. Another cornerstone of the philosophy was the idea of mastering time. Julian learned that time was life's most valuable asset. Unlike money or possessions, once lost, time could never be regained. The sages planned their days with precision. Every minute was used with intention. Julian adopted the habit of creating a daily schedule each morning. He would map out his activities, ensuring there was time for learning, service, rest, and joy. This structure didn't limit him, it freed him. With a clear plan, he felt less overwhelmed, more in control, and deeply fulfilled. He also learned a technique called the magic rule of 21. Any new habit, the sages said, required 21 days of consistent practice to become part of your life. Julian used this to build his new lifestyle. He chose one habit at a time: rising early, meditation, clean eating, exercise, journaling, and practiced it daily for 21 days. By focusing on one habit at a time, he avoided burnout and ensured lasting change. The key, he explained, was consistency. It wasn't about doing things perfectly, it was about doing them daily. Even small efforts, repeated over time, created profound results. One of the most beautiful lessons was about joy. The sages believed that joy was not something to chase, it was something to cultivate. They practiced gratitude every day. Before each meal, before each meditation, before each task, they paused to say thank you. They expressed appreciation for the sun, for breath, for friendship, for the opportunity to grow. Julian had embraced this fully. He kept a gratitude journal, writing down 5 things he was thankful for every night. This simple act rewired his perspective. He began to notice beauty in the mundane, blessings in challenges, and abundance in simplicity. As Julian concluded his 3rd evening of storytelling, his friend sat in silent reflection. The teachings were not foreign or unreachable. They were grounded, practical, and deeply human. Julian wasn't speaking from theory, he was living proof. He was calmer, more focused, and full of life. His presence felt like sunlight. In a world obsessed with speed, Julian had chosen stillness. In a culture addicted to accumulation, he had chosen simplicity. And in a profession known for competition, he had chosen compassion. He had found something rare, not in books or cities or courtrooms, but in stillness, in silence, in self-discovery. And as his friend listened, something began to shift. A stirring deep within, a seed of curiosity, a question that refused to be ignored. What if there was another way? The final morning of Julian's visit arrived with a quiet stillness. The air in the room felt different, not heavier, but more present. His friend could feel the transformation deepening within himself, sparked by the stories, the principles, and the energy Julian had brought. Over their last breakfast together, Julian began to share the final elements of the sages of Savannah's teachings, lessons that tied everything together. He spoke first of the importance of courage. Courage, he explained, was not about grand acts of heroism. It was about choosing authenticity in a world that demands conformity. It was about saying no when others expect yes, about pursuing a path that aligns with the heart, even when logic or fear resists. The sages had taught that the quality of life is determined by the quality of courage we express in our daily choices. Every day, Julian had started practicing what they called the 10-minute dare. He would spend 10 minutes doing something uncomfortable, something that pushed him just a little beyond his comfort zone. It could be a cold shower, speaking his truth in a difficult conversation, or stretching his limits during physical training. These small acts of courage began to compound. They gave him confidence. They rewired his relationship with fear. Over time, fear stopped paralyzing him. It became a compass, pointing toward growth. Next, Julian shared the lesson of living in the present. He remembered the moment clearly. It was dusk in the Himalayan valley. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. He had been sitting beside Yogi Raman, silent and still, And in that moment, without effort, he had felt fully alive. Not thinking about the past, not worrying about the future, just there, in the moment. He realized how rare that feeling had been in his old life. He had always been racing towards something: case deadlines, financial targets, court victories. And in the chase, he had missed life itself. The sages believed that peace could only be found in the present moment. So they practiced mindfulness in everything they did. When they ate, they truly tasted. When they walked, they noticed each step. When they listened, they gave full attention. Julian adopted this too. He began to bring mindfulness into every task, no matter how small. Washing dishes, tying shoelaces, speaking to someone, breathing. He discovered that the present moment held more richness than any future ambition ever could. He also spoke about balance. The sages lived in perfect harmony. They balanced service and solitude, discipline and joy, focus and play. Julian had once lived in extremes. He worked hard, played hard, and burned out harder. Now, he followed a rhythm. He worked with focus but took regular breaks. He pursued goals but detached from the outcome. He remained ambitious but not at the cost of peace. Balance, he learned, was not a compromise. It was wisdom. It allowed him to give his best without losing himself. Julian then described the principle of self-respect. The sages believed that self-respect was the root of personal greatness. It meant honoring your word to yourself. If you said you would rise early, then rise. If you promised to meditate, then sit. If you made a commitment to grow, then grow. Every time you break a promise to yourself, you weaken self-trust. But every time you keep your word, you become stronger. Julian had once been reliable to his clients, his firm, his deadlines. But he had neglected the promises he made to himself. Now, those promises were sacred. He no longer sought external validation. His integrity came from within. His actions aligned with his values. That was self-respect. That was power. He went on to explain the law of consistency. The sages were not obsessed with perfection. They believed in persistence. 1 page read every day became a book in a month. 1 minute of meditation became a deep practice over a year. They didn't strive for overnight transformation. They trusted slow, steady growth. Julian had once been driven by speed, faster results, bigger outcomes. But in Savannah, he learned that true change was like planting a seed. You nourish it, protect it, and give it time. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, it blooms. He brought that patience back with him. He no longer rushed. He respected the seasons of life. He became consistent, and with consistency came momentum. His transformation was not an accident. It was the result of disciplined daily actions. And finally, Julian spoke of legacy. The sages believed that the purpose of life was to live in such a way that when you are gone, the world is better. They asked each other, "What will be remembered when I am not here?" Not the possessions, not the titles, but the impact, the love given, the lives touched. Julian began to live with this question in his heart. He gave more freely. He listened more deeply. He served more joyfully. He no longer measured his days by what he achieved, but by how he made others feel. That, he said, was true success. Not a Ferrari, not a mansion, not a courtroom victory, but a life of meaning, connection, and peace. As he finished sharing, a silence settled in the room. It was not empty, it was full. His friend sat still, absorbing it all. He felt a quiet shift. A doorway had opened. Julian stood and walked to the window. The city buzzed outside. Cars rushed. People hurried, but he remained still. He turned back and smiled, not with the smile of a man who had all the answers, but of someone who had found the right questions. He offered a final thought. Live each day as if it were your last, but plan as if you will live forever. Be fierce in your intentions, but gentle in your presence. Pursue your dreams, but never at the cost of your peace. And never forget, you are more powerful than you know. You are more capable than you believe, and the world needs your light. Julian picked up his small bag. There were no suits inside, no legal briefs, just a few robes, some books, and a journal filled with wisdom. He hugged his friend with warmth and walked to the door. As he left, the room remained still, but the atmosphere had changed. Something lingered. a calm, a clarity, a call to awaken. And in the quiet that followed, his friend reached for a notebook. Not to write a case, not to draft a plan, but to begin. Begin his own journey inward. Begin with a single breath. Begin with a simple promise. To live not just by routine, but with purpose. To see not just with eyes, but with heart. To chase not just success, but significance. To become more than what the world expects. To become whole. And so, the monk who sold his Ferrari had not merely returned. He had planted a seed, and that seed, nurtured by truth, would bloom in lives far beyond his own. For wisdom, once shared, lives on forever.
He gave up everything to find what truly matters. From chaos to clarity, from ambition to awakening. Julian Mantle's journey is a mirror for us all. Now the question is, will you answer the call? If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you pause, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This is Victory Think, where ideas ignite and lives transform. Until next time, keep thinking beyond.